Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.
Night has fallen on the desert, the Southern California mountains, a ring of fire. The whole Southwest choked in smoke. We went from miserable heat wave to horrible wildfires. And if not for these many blazes, most intentionally started by lunatics, we'd all be enjoying this sudden and welcome plunge in temperature. Like many people these days, I am generally against crucifixion. But the people who intentionally burn down our forest. One thing we tend to understand is that we need the forest, the woodland. Benjamin Franklin understood that 2.5 centuries ago. He understood when you scrape every living thing from the natural landscape, you kill it, and you kill your natural watersheds, which require the forest and the woodland, and yes, the scrub oak and scrub brush to delay snowmelt and filter the water that eventually ends up in our lakes, our rivers, our kitchen sinks. England and Scotland and Ireland had lost nearly all of its dense forest cover long before Benjamin Franklin noted that America had the luxury of a choice. This is from a 1999 article on the NASA Earth Observatory website. In 1763, Benjamin Franklin took part in discussions with colonial scholars about the effects of deforestation on local climate. As forests were cleared for farming in the early American colonies, Franklin agreed with the other colonials that cleared land absorbs more heat and melts snow quicker. And here we are in 2024 when the government of the United States is engaged in a wide-scale holocaust of ancient old-growth western woodlands. Pinyon, juniper, Joshua tree for the short-term benefit of corporate industrialized solar installations that will be junk in 25 years. The woodlands on the literal chopping block, especially in the Nevada interior right now, they do not grow back. The wild animals and insects and migrating birds do not come back to a place without trees and brush. You know what happens when wild natural desert is scraped of all life, of the creosote and sage and conifers growing slowly and steadily for centuries, for millennia? It stays gone, it stays dead when the shell corporations assembled to launder billions of tax dollars are long gone and the profits safely in the hands of the estates and trust funds of these CEOs who never set foot on these once rich landscapes, now left utterly devastated. All that grows in such places are weeds. Russian thistle and ragweed catching bits of plastic shed by the used-up open-air electricity factory they installed on your public lands, your wild American landscape, where you could be camping, hiking, hunting, riding your mountain bicycles, walking your dogs, communing with the flora and fauna, being in the presence of God. There is a great rush to cover the vast, beautiful, irreplaceable Great Basin Desert, the basin-and-range landscape that is the last preserve of the great American West. With endless miles of made-in-China cheap solar panels on utterly murdered land. A lifeless hell on Earth. Natural ecosystems that have been the living, breathing lungs of the planet for thousands of years are being sawn down, bulldozed, and shredded for the short-term gain of the very rich. They know as well as you do that solar panels atop a warehouse or a parking lot or a rooftop means collecting and delivering electricity where it's needed, direct to consumer, as they say. The business advantage of being given America's public lands to destroy and exploit, along with being given the cost of equipment and hiring, and the tax breaks so the easy profits never help the counties and communities near these hideous crime scenes, is simple enough to understand. You, the individual, part of the national collective, lose your public lands, your American wilderness, so that a handful of already wealthy people get a free commodity to sell. A commodity produced upon a graveyard, the site of a massacre. Something deeply evil has happened to environmentalism. A word that once meant the love of wild nature.
Desert Oracle Radio.
The ethos that created the national park system, the mystical and transcendental appreciation of the glory of creation, as expressed by American poets and heroes such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, John Muir, Mary Austin, Minerva Hamilton Hoyt, David Brower, Dave Foreman, Edward Abbey. But somehow, along the way, the environment itself was robbed, beaten, murdered, and left to rot by the climate change industry. The climate change industry takes money and resources from states and nations, destroys the natural environment, and does little or nothing to limit climate change effects. Instead, it aggressively launders oil company polluter profits into Byzantine shadow governments, NGOs in their awful jargon, that exists like the cancer cell only to spread, to enlarge, to control more. More of the world's economy, to destroy more wilderness, to kill the earth. They're killing the earth and they want you to like it. Because as long as you like it, as long as you keep clicking the little heart button underneath another greenwashing organization with a meaningless slogan like helping the planet, they get away with it. They get away with murder. But what about forest? Songbirds, pronghorn, mule deer. The quiet beauty of vast natural landscapes. They don't care. They will kill it all and erect miles-long industrial solar farms as the shoddy, shameful, dystopian tombstones. Where did the $7.5 billion in taxpayer money to build electric car charging stations go? Sure did not go toward the 500,000 charging stations it was supposed to pay for, that we paid for. Instead, that immense money laundering operation, that federal government corporate welfare program, produced a total of 8 EV charging stations. 8. Roughly $1 billion per EV charging station. And a dual-port EV charging station cost about $6,000. And can be profitable for an existing gas station in about a year based on the station's traffic. They are robbing you, they are robbing the future to destroy your wildlands, and they're getting richer while the rest of us struggle. They're getting richer for killing the mountain lions, the coyotes, killing the literal lands where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play. Do you know where the deer and the antelope play in the United States today? The Intermountain West, the Great Basin. The Great Basin between the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies. That is what is being destroyed. With electronic signatures on a PDF today and with monstrous machines of murder tomorrow. Don't be fooled by the lies about demand either. Look it up. See how much of that electricity vanishes over hundreds of miles of gruesome transmission towers striding across the once beautiful landscape like death robots. See how much carbon the wild landscape captures and holds in its perfect natural form. From the invisible networks of cryptobiotic desert soils to the centuries-old 40-foot-tall Joshua trees and pinyons, mowed down like war protesters and fed into the wood chippers. See how they're destroying nature for green energy. And how fossil fuel use just keeps rising despite the stagnant human populations, despite the fuel efficiency of our vehicles. And the little green leaf icon on the phone map route. I know, nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to hear that the U.S. population has been stagnant for a decade and the rapid permanent decline in human population is coming far faster than the average distracted consumer of junk media state disinformation knows. Actual demand for all things is not rising, it's stagnant. They don't care. They will take the easy takings off the table for as long as your government is giving away your birthright, your American legacy, and it's time for it to stop. There are rusting, rotting green energy graveyards all over the West today. Why rebuild existing solar and wind farms when Uncle Sam gives you endless miles of virgin wilderness for nothing, for free? You can't blame the business people for doing what business people do. But you can sure blame the bureaucrats who destroy what can never be replaced. Blame them and stop them. Stop them in the courts. Stop them on the ballot. Stop them in the desert valleys and mountains that are your spiritual home, the home of the brave. Land of the... I can't remember. And when the United States goes bust in the coming years and the money stops flowing to these fly-by-night fake green companies, well, they will just leave those devastated landscapes in whatever level of devastation they were able to complete before the teat went dry. Make it hard for them, and they'll go somewhere else. Chase some other bubble with big government handouts. Maybe that artificial intelligence, which burns up all the energy you've carefully saved with your LED lights and hybrid vehicles, burns it all up for nothing every day so that obviously incorrect information and slop images are the result when you try to find out anything at all. But remember that none of this destruction of your natural and only home, this earthly paradise, is business in the traditional sense, and the sense of a company buying assets such as land and materials and equipment and technology to then produce something for a profit. This is welfare. This is given away. 2 decades ago, when I moved from the Great Basin to the Mojave, they were already calling it the Green Gold Rush. There is nothing renewable about killing our land, our flora and fauna, our natural world that we are tasked with the stewardship of. They are the enemy. Be fooled no more. They are the enemy of America the Beautiful. What do you do when the enemy comes for your life? And what is environmentalism, really? Besides a dead ideal, dead from decades of relentless industrial sodomy, the word has been greenwashed out of any real meaning when a word means everything from fake plastic recycling programs to the widespread bloody murder of the last wild places in the West. It needs to be buried in the landfill with all that plastic they never actually recycle. And I'm ready. Let's put it in the ground. Make sure it's all the way dead. Cut off the head. Cut off its hands and feet, too, so it can't get up again and return to its labors. Burn the rest, stake through the rib cage, douse with holy water, and smoke it with sage. I used to live in the Balkans, in the former Yugoslavia, and every now and then the newspapers would report on a suspected vampire corpse found in the cemetery getting the old Van Helsing treatment. Ecologist? Now that's not a bad term, but it's still too wishy-washy. Naturalist? That's better. And what real environmentalists were called before the enviro-industrial complex was created, mostly with laundered money from the likes of Chevron. Preservationist is all right, as is conservationist, but both words are difficult for the majority, confusing, too many syllables, too many similarities to the other pile of isms that ultimately mean nothing and just irritate people. Like a land acknowledgement before a mining consortium's annual board meeting. Let's see here. Wilderness is the only thing worth saving. The industrial corporation is the natural enemy of nature. The more corrupt society, the more numerous its laws. To the intelligent man or woman, life appears infinitely mysterious, but the stupid have an answer for every question. I'm looking for this quote by Ed Abbey. And pretty much everyone I see, every quote is applicable in this little book of Abbey quotes. Yeah, I'll read Ed Abbey till I die, and you should too, if you're at all alive. If your social theology is too delicate to read a couple of words you don't personally agree with 100%, save yourself the heartache of reading it all. Play more video games. Send more money to a virtual stripper on the internet. That's fine. Don't strain your brain with something you might not have already been told to think. Speaking of, a stripper on Twitter posted about finding a lizard in her dad's kitchen, which is probably a story in itself, and the dad said the lizard's name was Kevin. I do enjoy lizard content on the internet, and then I remembered with a certain melancholy how a couple of weeks ago I collected the waterlogged chamois from under the dog's bowl where he drools everywhere to dry on the porch. And my kitchen lizard was in there and looked up at me in horror, suddenly exposed to the harsh desert sun, and it vanished into the dead weeds. Oh, I felt terrible. A couple of years ago, I quit doing the annual pest control poison service, and various lizards began to make their home in the various gaps and doorways and under sink areas. And now I've got several such creatures in the house and the radio studio, and it's fantastic. They eat the ants, they eat the excess spiders and the smaller bugs that otherwise attract the scorpions and the centipedes, and I truly love the lizards. Skinks, geckos, lizards of the night, and by unfortunate accident, I threw out my favorite, the biggest one. Well, hopefully you got back inside, though I haven't recently seen it around. Anyway, I cannot find this quote, and of course searching for book text on the internet doesn't work anymore. I've got pretty much every Edward Abbey book and the Desert Oracle library here, but no time to flip through all of them, and they're hard to put down once you start, you know? It might be from an essay collection, or maybe the introduction to an essay collection. But it's not in the nature chapter of Abbey's A Voice Crying in the Wilderness, so from memory, I believe he says something like, "I'm not a naturalist. The only birds I recognize are the turkey vulture and the rosy-bottomed skinny dipper. Call me a ranger, one who loves unfenced country, one who ranges." Something like that. You see, it's true now, and it was true 50 years ago, that Edward Abbey was not put on this earth to write platitudes for the committee, to write corporate communications. The best thing that could happen to the thousands of tourists staying in desert vacation rentals this fall is to actually sit down and read that paperback copy of Desert Solitaire the designer puts with the other 3 books, so it looks like you're sort of literate in the social media post. Walking the hills at sundown, I see there's more smoke coming from behind San Gorgonio. So much for driving up there tomorrow and getting some apple cider from the orchards. Maybe next week. Much cooler temperatures are on the way in the southwest, and there's even talk of rain. When I'm in apple country in the autumn months, whether Washington State or the Hudson Valley or in the apple pie mountain tourist town of Julian, where I used to live a lifetime ago, well, I want all the stuff, the fresh apple cider donuts, the hard cider lovingly made by some old hippies who moved back to the land and meant it, or a sack of ginger golds for making pies, even better with the later autumn Northern Spy apple. When you go up to the orchards to buy cider and a couple of pies worth of ripe apples, you were living like Rip Van Winkle, like Washington Irving. These apples produce the nutritious and refreshing beverages that America was built upon: hard cider and Applejack, which is apple brandy. And very similar to Calvados, the famous apple brandy of Normandy. American Applejack was distilled in the Atlantic colonies by the mid-1600s, nearly 4 centuries ago, mostly by the Dutch in those days. So why not finish up this gloomy episode and go cheer yourself up with some hard cider and a bag of apples and maybe even some Applejack. From Amboy to Zysix, broadcasting across the Great Mojave Wilderness, this is Desert Oracle Radio with new soundscapes by RedBlueBlackSilver. Look him up on the internet. It'll make you happy instead of the usual result when you look for something on the internet. Thanks to our supporters who keep this show alive at patreon.com/Desert Oracle. Notice there's no advertising. I don't like advertising. And so I kind of just get by, but it's better than having advertising, isn't it? Visit our website at desertoracle.com. You know, John Adams, our second president, is remembered as a New England Puritan, and yet the founding father began each day by drinking 2 massive tankards of hard cider, and later learned to enjoy the fine wines of France during his tenure there on the U.S. delegation. But cider was in his blood, probably enough to get a DUI in those days. Adams wrote in 1763 that he needed only 5 things to be happy. Give me bacon and cider and books and girls and friends. Decades later, in 1805, Adams wrote to a fellow Harvard man that he was worried about the slow decline of hard cider as the primary beverage on campus. Quote, "During the 4 years that I passed at college, there was not a single death among the scholars. And I've always believed that the almost universal health among the students was to be ascribed, next to early rising and beef and mutton pies at Commons, to the free use of cider and the very moderate use of wine and ardent spirits." I hope the wildfire smoke isn't too bad where you are, and I hope it goes away for all of us real soon. Good night from the voice of the desert.